Welcome to our farmer interview series by Global Farmer Network. I'm your host, Delaney Howell. Today we're heading to England, where we'll be chatting with farmer Ian Pigott, who farms just north of London, where he has a row crop, educational farm, and pop-up farm. Today we're going to be focusing on the conversation around regenerative agriculture and sustainability in honor of Earth Day. Ian, thanks for joining today. I think a great place to start our conversation would be to talk about your background and some of the really rich family history that your farm has there in England.
Well, so my background is it's a bit different. I grew up on the farm and spent my holidays like many farmers' sons and daughters working on the farm and learning the ropes, making lots of mistakes. And the farm, when I was a kid, it was an arable farm, but my father also had stocks. He had pigs, and he had cattle, and then he went into pigs, and then we had a few sheep. And after studying agriculture, I actually decided not to return to the farm. So I went into London and I traded commodities for just under 10 years. So that was great because it was I was really interested in it, but also it was always going to be useful when I came back to the farm to at least understand how markets work. But in terms of the farm itself, so we're about 20, 22, 23 miles north of Marble Arch. So we're very close to London. I've been in London today for a meeting. So it's, take me half an hour to get out of London. It's without traffic. So we're really close. Lots and lots of people around us. We've got, I don't know, probably 3 million people living within 10 miles of the farm. And as a family, we've been on this farm since 1907. So in the UK, roughly about 50% of all farms are rented or tenanted. So we're a tenant on the farm and the farm's owned by a large pension company.
So there's a lot of good nuggets there. I'd like to unpack a little bit more, but I'm curious. You mentioned you left the farm for about 10 years and then came back.
Yeah.
Did you always have the intention to come back to the family farm at some point?
I guess probably, although there was no sort of fixed agreement of, yes, I'll come back, by the time I'm X years old but farming, when I left university, farming was going through a pretty bad trot in the sort of so that was early 90s when I left uni. And there really wasn't space for my father and myself. And so I went into commodities, but I don't know, on reflection, a bit naively, I found myself specializing quite early on. So I went into what are called tropical oils. So I started off on a soya desk and then went on to do tropical oils, which is like palm oil, coconut oil, and all the derivatives surrounding those. And it's not a huge employer in the UK. So I got to the point, it was either, right, well, I go and work overseas and head up a desk in the Far East or in Europe somewhere, or I come back to the farm. So it slightly sort of played my hand for me.
So you said that about 50% of the farms in England are tenant farms. Can you describe what that means a little bit more for some of our listeners who may not be familiar with that arrangement?
Yeah, so the land would be owned by a landlord, and it might be a large estate where they have outlying farms that are then tenanted by the landlord, the landowner, or there might be institutional landlords. I know there's quite a lot of that sort of ownership in North America here and Australia. There is here in the UK. So like ours would be a pension company and they may have quite a lot of land holding. Or it might just be that someone has a farm, but they're not farmers themselves. So they have a lifestyle farm and they want someone to look after the land. Without getting too boring about it, but up until the mid-80s, we had a tenancy in the UK that was called an AHA tenancy. It was an Agricultural Holdings Act tenancy. And those tenancies were traditionally a 3-generational tenancy. So it could be handed from father to daughter, father to son 3 times. But so that was an 86 tenancy. Since the 90s, we've had a lot more what we call FBTs, farm business tenancies. And they would ordinarily be anything from 3 to 5 to 10 years. They can be longer, but those would be, which we're going to talk about regenerative farming. And the length of tenancy is a really interesting thing to talk over because, if you're talking regenerative farming or carbon or all these things, they're very much long view activities, so difficult with the short-term tenancy.
Okay, so before we get to the regenerative piece of your farming operation, started in 1907. I'm sure it's had some changes since then, but tell us what the farm looks like current day today.
It's very different to the one that I used to play on when I was a kid. Back then we employed quite a lot of people on the farm, maybe 8 or 9 employees. Since then, our acreage has grown and then reduced. And so now we employ just one person on the farm. But the rest of the farm, when you ask what it looks like, it's a busy place because, like a lot of farms in the UK, we're heavily diversified. So we have a lot of offices based here. We have 40 offices or so based on the farm. So lots of people coming every day who aren't farmers, but they add a great wealth to the character and the atmosphere around the farm. And they're from all different types of business, from IT to finance to head offices for various different companies and so forth, marketing, or trying to think what else. We've got personal training studios. So there's a bit of everything goes on here. And that's sort of they as having their offices here, they like the farm as a part of the fabric of why they come here. There's still the farming activities goes on. We don't have any livestock of our own, but we sort of actively encourage others to bring livestock to graze our cover crops. And so the farm is sort of now a lot of environmental stewardship, and we've been no-till here for, I think this is year 8. So not as much machinery as there was when I was a kid. Back then there were lots of tractors and lots of different types of cultivators and plows and whatever else. Now it's a couple of tractors, one drill, and that's the lot.
So some of those practices that you mentioned, they're like no-till, cover cropping, etc. Were those practices that have been put in place since you kind of took over and have been stepping into the farm, or was that something that generations before you were introducing and you're just now continuing that on?
No, so I was keen to move away from the plow. So we moved to a sort of like a non-inversion shallow tillage technique back in I'm trying to think when that would have been late 90s. And yeah, I would attribute to the confidence of going no-till came through the Global Farmer Network, actually. So I've been toying with it in my head, but I just didn't quite have the confidence to jump over the edge. And I was out in Iowa and spent some time talking to Sarah Singler from France, who had been on her grandfather's farm, had been no-till for 30 years, I think, and that gave me the confidence to make the leap.
That's really neat. So you said that was about 8 years ago that you started introducing some of those practices after visiting other farms, talking to other members within the Global Farmer Network. And then now here we are, present day, 8 years later. Tell us, because regenerative agriculture and sustainability has really become a buzzword over the last couple of years. How would you define regenerative agriculture?
Oh gosh, not to be quoted. I think there's an ag show in the UK which has been going probably for 5 years now, which basically called Groundswell, set up by a family called the Cherry family. And their focus has been all around regenerative farming. And they talk about 5 principles, which would be diverse rotations, keeping the soil covered at all times, introduction of livestock, little or no disturbance of the soil. I might be forgetting one, but roughly. So regenerative, as I see it, is about all those things. And we really do try and live quite strictly by that. The diverse rotation can be quite challenging with the British climate. We've had some difficult springs for the last few years, where we've had very little rainfall during the spring, so that's made spring cropping difficult. But the spring cropping is a really key part of it, so we can get the cover crops in place to add that diversity. And our cover crops normally have between 5 and 12 species in them. So and the livestock I'm just not a good enough stockman to have my own stock, so we had to bring someone else who's an expert in to do that.
But you said for the livestock piece, you were inviting other farmers to graze their livestock on your cover crops. How does that work?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, if so, let's say we put a cover crop in after a harvest. So if we harvested a crop on, let's say, late August, we'd be planting those cover crops the same day as we harvest, or maybe the day after. And then as long as we've got enough biomass and enough canopy there, then we'll try and get the stock in and graze it. Let's say that might be in maybe in March time, and then we try and get a minimum of about 8 weeks grazing on it. So probably a bit earlier than that, probably about February. So that's the plan there. But it's just the cover. What we're doing now is we're trying actually to plant specific mixes for stock, because a cover crop doesn't have, whilst they look wonderful and dense, they don't actually have as much sort of dry matter in there as they appear. So that's kind of what we've been doing more recently.
Ian, I also read something recently that you shared that was your quest for carbon neutrality, which I found really interesting as well, because carbon has also been a really big buzzword in the industry for the last few years. What is carbon neutrality and what is your quest for it?
Okay, so I mean, in the UK, I don't know how it plays out in other parts of the world, but in the UK, we've got some quite good carbon modeling tools. There's an organization in the UK called LEAF, Linking Environment and Farming, and so they've got a really good model to help guide farmers on getting carbon neutrality. And I suppose fundamentally, the first thing we need to understand is where are we judging our carbon footprint starting and stopping. So for example, if we're buying nitrogen fertilizer, does that carbon footprint lie with us or with a fertilizer manufacturer? And then once you've established those guidelines, it is, it's not without its challenges, but it is relatively straightforward. It's a desktop exercise. And so we have looked here to see whether or not we are in a position to trade our carbon. And that's something that we've been doing for 2 years now. Actually, what we're doing is when I say we're trading, we're banking certificates rather than selling them, because there does feel in the UK to be a lot of uncertainty around carbon, and in some ways, it almost feels like there's less certainty today in 2023 than there was 2 years ago. And we don't know whether or not the government might decide that as farmers we need to be offsetting or insetting. We're just we want to be in that space, because we're behaving with our farm, we're behaving in a way that means we can generate certificates. So my feeling, rightly or wrongly, is that if we're doing it already, we should at least be getting some reward for it.
Yeah, with a commodity trading background too, I'm curious, do you think that we'll get to a point where carbon is a commodity that is traded?
I've almost feel less certain about it now than I did 18 months ago. I've just been on a sort of study trip to Australia, and I was fascinated what has happened out there, where the Labour government basically said that the 250 biggest polluters in Australia have to offset with Aussie carbon, so they can't offset with British carbon or carbon from Timbuktu. And I think the carbon market went from about $27 to $70 with that piece of legislation. In the UK, I've been trying to find, just this last week, I've been trying to find examples of farms who have found a commercial partner to sell carbon direct to an offset to a carbon polluter. And there are a number of models of organizations that are accrediting through baseline FERA 1 or FERA 2, and but I haven't found anyone that's doing that direct carbon trade yet, because I think we're still trying to nail down how we measure it. How do we measure soil organic carbon? And because we know that it's, you can take a carbon reading in the same place a month apart, and they can give you quite different readings. So it's really difficult. So a really long-winded answer to your short question: will carbon be traded? I think it will, but I don't think it's going to be this sort of gold rush that a lot of people think it will be. And I'm interested that in the States, I think that there are a couple of states now that have said that you can't ESG cannot be the basis of a pension portfolio. So there is a shift away from it in some places as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the States, I feel like we're still on the quest of how we actually measure carbon and sequestering the carbon, and incentivizing farmers to see what the ROI is behind that. I think there's still a lot of pieces, at least for the States, of developing that before we really see it widely adopted. So it's interesting to hear where it's at in the pipeline for other countries. As you look at, these practices, though, sustainability, cover crops, regenerative agricultural practices as a whole, you kind of shared why that light bulb moment happened for you. But again, you could have decided to ease into it very slowly, or to kind of do some more research before you really dove into it. Why was it important for you to start implementing those practices right away? And it sounds like really you guys have kind of dug into it fairly heavily, maybe compared to others who ease into that space.
So I'd done quite a lot of research. So I had done quite a lot of research across a number of continents, and spoken to and met with a number of farmers who had explored this. Quite a few Nuffield scholars, if you're familiar with the Nuffield network. And a number of years ago, 2007, 8, I took a couple of farms organic, and we stayed organic for 5 years, and then for different reasons came out of the organic system. But I did learn a lot of lessons in that process. And the fundamental lesson I learned with that transition, it was a huge shift in attitude. And I was like, okay, so the numbers add up, let's just do it. And I didn't, I made a lot of really naive mistakes. I didn't really share the reasons why with our staff at the time. And so no one really bought into it. And so when I thought we were going to go down this sort of regen route, it was really important. We traveled the country, all of us as a team, with the other members of staff at the time. We had more then, but we all went to speak to the farmers and understand what we were trying to achieve, and the farmers and the sort of landowners that we were farming on behalf of as well. Because if they weren't on board, because there are impacts on, you need to understand that you're going to be farming with a different metric. You need to be farming based on on net profit, and not being focused on yield all the time. And so that transition, it to me, it was like, if we're 90% sure that this is the route we want to go down, why don't we just go all in? It seemed to me like it was going to cost more money to have a foot in two camps. And also there would always be the temptation to go and drag a plow out the hedge or something, or so just if we think it's right, we'll get on and do it. And if we made a catastrophic mistake, but there were other reasons at play as well, Delaney. We were struggling with a grass weed over here that we weren't the worst in the country, but we definitely weren't the best either. And there's an old sort of farming expression: if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. And we weren't getting on top of blackgrass, so it's like, well, we got to do something different. So I think it was a pretty easy decision. And at the same time, we made the decision to stop using any insecticides. And it's like, that to my mind was people say, oh gosh, that's a brave decision. And I know different climates are different, but in the UK, I just thought our use of insecticides seems very haphazard and lacks science, and really bad for the environment. So it's like, if you just make the decision you're not going to use them, then you're not umming and ahhing about whether or not you're going to use them. It's easy.
Well, be sure to catch part 2 of our conversation here with Ian Pigott coming up later this week, where we chat specifically about their educational farm.